Welcome to Windows on the World. This is our Tuesday live stream, and we're going to be doing more of these, so do remember to join us. We usually go out at 9 p.m. UK time, sometimes 8 p.m. Do join us on Sunday for our show at 9:30 p.m., which is always live at windowsontheworld.net live shows page. We usually put up a trailer for our shows on YouTube, which also goes to Odyssey. We're on Odyssey as well. All of this information where you can find us is on the homepage at windowsontheworld.net. We also have a Discord server if you'd like to meet interesting people or have interactions and maybe pick up some useful information. We have our own server on Discord, all on the homepage at windowsontheworld.net. I do reiterate this nearly every week, but people do seem to miss it and they still ask where they can find some of our shows. It's all in the archive on the website. Every Sunday we do a live show, 9:30 p.m. UK time. And our last show was World War III, a frontline report. And we're getting a lot of people interested in that one. People are now going to Spreaker, which is where the shows originate on Sunday. And you can subscribe to us on Spreaker too. So it's all on the homepage at windowsontheworld.net. Check out the archive and also the vast amount of information that's on the website. On our Sunday show, we covered the latest United Nations paper, which is taking us further into the grasp of absolute totalitarian global governance. There are solutions to this. It's all about decentralizing. And the new system the UN are bringing in under sustainable development and the Agenda 2030 goals is that all media, all information is being controlled. In other words, through the UN and its agencies, which are the World Bank, the IMF, and the World Health Organization, plus many more. Gavi, of course, the Vaccine Alliance, which is basically run by them, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They are now stating in their goals, in our common agenda, that's your common agenda, if you go along with it, that we are going to have to agree with them and their so-called science on everything. It's absolutely tyrannical. They're describing everything outside of the controlled narrative as basically unscientific, hate speak, right wing, you name it. Well, I think you know the limited terms of the United Nations by now. It's a communist communitarian system. It was based on communism, but that was a bit unpopular. So now they're calling it communitarianism, which basically means totalitarianism, but masquerading as a global community. Are you a global citizen? I hope not, because global citizens act locally. Do go into our archive and you'll find so much on what's going on at the moment. We've been covering it for years. Take a look at A Plan to Rule the World, which is all about the current system. You can find that on the homepage at windowsontheworld.net. And you can have a look at the whole history of where we are now through the climate change agenda. My guest tonight is Jerry Marzinski. I've had Jerry on many times before. We've done lots of shows with him in the archive. Check out Demons Are Real. Check out The Presence of Other Worlds in Schizophrenia. We're going to be talking about that very broadly tonight because we are going to talk about how negative entities attach themselves to people and manifest, but more importantly, what the actual process is. And there is a process of how these voices get into people's heads. And having studied it for years, it's an amazing phenomenon. And let's just have a look at what we're going to be in for if the World Health Organization and the UN control the narrative. This is the World Health Organization definition of schizophrenia. The definition of the cause is it is thought that an interaction between genes and a range of environmental factors may cause schizophrenia. So in other words, they don't know. They talk about delusions. Well, most people in the world, if they are going along with this agenda, are filling themselves with delusions. And that's called the wilderness of the mind. And that is all part of the global action plan under the United Nations as well. Let's see what they say about delusions. Fixed false beliefs. Oh, we see a lot of those, don't we? Fixed false beliefs. Or suspicions not shared by others in the person's culture and that are firmly held even when there is no evidence to the contrary. Well, you could say that about exactly what we're being told at the moment. Quite incredible, isn't it? I'm going to bring Jerry in because we're going to talk about this phenomenon, which I've been absolutely fascinated by for years. And Jerry is the only person I've ever conversed with who has a background as a psychiatric practitioner, who worked in some of the biggest mental institutions and prisons in the United States. And he talks about what nobody else has talked about before. Jerry, I've just introduced you, saying that you talk about what we're talking about tonight in a way that nobody I know has ever talked about it before. And that's how we actually got in touch with each other. I've just given a very brief introduction and a little bit of a background, but introduce yourself, Jerry, for people who may not have heard of you before.
Oh, well, I've been on the front lines of mental health close to 40 years now. I'm still working with some select patients who are really motivated to get rid of their voices. Uh, but yeah, when I started out, it was Central State Hospital, the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet at the time. One thing I noticed was everybody believed that the voices were hallucinations. They weren't curious about what the voices were telling schizophrenics, and I couldn't comprehend that. You know, I was curious about it, so I started asking a lot of questions about it. I got in trouble with psychiatry twice just for asking questions. They told me these are hallucinations. You're making these patients worse by asking questions about it because you're acting like they're real. You know, the problem is they are real. You know.
Yes, and when I first heard you, you were on an interview. It was quite a few years ago now, and you gave these basically recollections and case studies, you could call them, of what had happened to you when you were in the presence of people who were suffering from this so-called delusion, which is a lot more than that. And I'd never heard anyone talking about these negative entities before because I'd experienced it in my relations with other people. And I was aware of what you were talking about. But to people who are totally new to this, it sounds a bit way out and wacky, but it's actually quite a common phenomenon. Many people develop paranoid schizophrenia, and to the medical profession, it's a completely enigmatic illness. So they describe it as delusional. And of course, schizophrenia means fractured mind, but this is anything but fractured mind, isn't it?
Well, it's two minds. You know,
Yes.
so schizophrenia means split mind, and that's about the only thing they got right about it.
Mm.
You know, the other thing is, yeah, there are no genetic factors. Forget that.
Yeah.
That what you just read there, that's bullcrap. They've already disproved it.
Mm.
What there is a one-to-one correspondence between very nasty physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. I mean, virtually every schizophrenic I've spoken to has suffered one of those traumas, or they've used a lot of meth. Meth does something to their spiritual energy field that just dissolves it and lets these things in. So, you know, when I first started in the field, I was thinking, based on what they taught me in graduate school, it'd be like, oh yeah, these things are, it's like word salad. You know, the voices don't make any sense. They're hallucinations. They're just they're not coherent. They did a, and slowly, bit by bit, talking to these schizophrenics, I found out it's anything but. They're completely coherent. They know
Yeah.
what they're saying. They know what they're after. And not only that, they hit us all. It's
Yeah.
not just the schizophrenics. They hit us all. And you've all experienced this when, you know, you're walking down the sidewalk, you're minding your own business, and all of a sudden a thought just barges into your head that's completely crazy, you know, and disgusting to you. It's like you're shocked that you even had such a thought.
Yes.
And it shakes you up, you know,
Mm.
and it's like, oh, hit somebody or stab somebody or hit somebody with a club, or yeah, I just run them over, or something like that. It's something you
Yes.
would never act upon,
Yes.
you
That's
know.
the interesting point, isn't it, Jerry? Because those things, if you're aware and conscious, you will know that that is an intrusion. But for the people who are the victims of this, these voices become louder, more relentless, and then they take over. What I meant really when I said they didn't get the definition right is that the general definition, when they say shattered or fractured mind with schizophrenia, They think it's random, and these people are basically talking rubbish. And that's the kind of assumption. So when I'd met people who had paranoid schizophrenia, I immediately judged it as being something that was incomprehensible. In other words, their thought patterns were completely garbled. But that's not the case at all, because having seen this close up, I realized that there is a relentless pursuit of the person to take absolute control. And we're going to go into the patterns that these voices run tonight, which is really fascinating. And it's due to your research that I've been able to take this further, because it goes into areas which I've been studying for about 20 years. And you're the only person on the planet at the moment I know who can actually have this conversation. So this is very important stuff. And I hope people out there are going to enjoy what we're going to do tonight. We've got many interviews with Jerry in the archive. I'm going to put them all together in an article at windowsontheworld.net. We had yes.
I think we did one with George Jagatic, right?
I was just going to bring that up. Tell us about George.
George was a therapist in a New York hospital. Okay, he's working with psych patients in one of the big New York hospitals, and he started using meth, and then he started hearing voices, and the voices started taking him over. So he knew what they were, and I'm looking at my email in the morning, and all of a sudden I get this note, long letter from George. And he said, yeah, I'm a therapist. I worked as a therapist in a psych hospital in New York. I started using meth. I started hearing voices, and I'm struggling with them now. So he wrote me this long letter about where he was. And I'm like, well, he knows what's going on. He just doesn't know what to do about it. So I contacted George, and we worked together for 4 or 5 months, and his voices now are virtually gone. He knows what to do about it. He drove them off himself. All you have to do is teach these people what to do if they're not too far along. There's a certain point though where you can't reach them normally. Okay, yes. So if you can't reach them normally, then you have to use these drugs, the antipsychotic drugs, and those drugs are horrible. They're toxic. They kill your brain. They kill your nervous system with long-term use. I've seen patients at the psych hospital. They called it the Thorazine shuffle. They couldn't even walk right. They shuffled. Their tongues stick out. It was like tongue darting, like they couldn't control the shaking. This is all neurological damage done by these drugs. And the psychiatric mafia is trying to convince everybody that there is no other way to treat schizophrenia than with these toxic drugs. And when the research came out that the people who were using these drugs had shrunken brains and damaged nervous systems, the psychiatric mafia and the big pharma are going, no, it's the schizophrenia doing that. It's the disease, and schizophrenia isn't a disease. There is no disease. It's a disorder. They want to make it look like a disease so they can treat it with these expensive drugs that they're using that are, in the U.S. they're like 10 times more expensive than they are if you cross the border to Mexico, and they're made by the same company. So what they're doing is they're just raping the population.
Yes, I mean, there is a lot of evidence out there that people can look at. There is a film called Psychiatry: An Industry of Death, which is actually, it's linked to, I think, the Scientology church in some way or other. But that doesn't mean that the information in it isn't worthwhile, because it's actually professionals talking about it. It's actually a very good film. And that gives the history, as does your book. So I think you should introduce your book before we go any further.
Okay, Sherry and I wrote this. Sherry is an engineer. I knew her for 10 years before she told me she was hearing voices as a young girl. And then I started talking to her about one of the patients I was working with when I was working in the prison. She goes, "Oh, I know all about that. I heard voices when I was younger." So we decided we needed to do something about this, because she was the only person that I could talk to who was sane. Now, I could talk to schizophrenics all day long. They knew what I was talking about. They knew what the voices were. But I couldn't talk to any of my mental health staff that I worked with. I couldn't talk to any of my supervisors. I couldn't even talk to my wife because she got scared. So there was nobody to talk to. And there were times where I felt like I was going crazy, because all this stuff is going on, and then weird stuff started happening. and weird stuff started happening when I was working with psychotic prisoners. Um, so finding Sherry was like that was like a godsend. But I couldn't believe. I mean, she's one of the most spiritually advanced people I know. And she goes, yeah, I know all about the voices. So I started hammering her with questions, that nobody else would know the answer to, but people who had heard voices. And bam, 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 right, one after another. She just, she knew it. She knew it. So now I had somebody I could finally talk to about this stuff. And then we decided, well, we need to write a book about this. And we did. And it was the one you just saw. You can get it from our website at jerrymarzinski.com under books. It's also on Amazon. Um, and it'll tell you how this came about. How we actually found that the voices are entities and not hallucinations. And psychiatry is not going to admit this at all. The psychiatry and psychology are spiritually devoid, and human beings are spiritual beings. Schizophrenia and virtually all other mental illnesses are spiritual illnesses, especially schizophrenia. And the voices run very set, fixed, predictable patterns that repeat over and over again. It's almost like they all were schooled at some demonic university somewhere, because the voices that I worked with here in Arizona, in the emergency room and in the prisons and in the private hospitals, they had these same exact patterns that we're going to be talking about, that the voices at the state hospital 1,500 miles away had. They were the same thing. They ran the same exact patterns. They were the same things. So they're consistent beyond time and space.
And also, the main thing is they're consistently negative against the victim. So they have a memory as well. We've talked about this before, but they seem to have access to the whole memory of the person, even things that the person would have forgotten, and they drag them up and basically torment the person until they have full control. So maybe you could just go into that before we move on to the actual definitions and the list that you've got.
Yeah, they are consistently negative. The schizophrenic voices. They tell the person you're stupid, you're a liar, you're a scumbag, nobody likes you, you can't trust anybody, people are talking behind your back, you're fat, you're ugly, da, 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 da. All that kind of stuff. Those come from these entities that are not part of your thought. They don't belong in your mind. Now, we're taught from the time we're kids that every thought that goes into your mind or comes through your mind belongs to you. That is not true. Emanuel Swedenborg pointed that out. He's a Christian mystic some 300 years ago. And the first time I actually realized what was going on with that is when he started talking about his interactions with evil spirits. And then I was in contact with Dr. Wilson Van Dusen, who wrote a book, The Presence of Other Worlds. And he was a clinical psychologist in a California hospital. And I worked with him for about a year, and we were starting to write a book. And he saw that what Swedenborg was talking about with regard to the negative spirits or the demonic spirits that he was holding conversations with matched virtually exactly what the schizophrenic voices were telling Dr. Van Dusen. And then I clamped onto that and jumped in too. So we got about 3 chapters written before a fast-moving cancer took Dr. Van Dusen out of the picture. We never got that book written. But I kind of promised him we'd get one done, and Sherry and I did do it. So the basics are in the book we just showed you. How we came to the conclusion that these things are entities. They are not hallucinations. And as long as they believe they're hallucinations, they're not going to have a cure. These things are entities, and they run patterns. And like Mark said, negativity is one of their most consistent patterns. They're consistently negative, derogatory, insulting, abusive, and destructive. Now, a lot of times they fake like they would be Christ or some angel or some other kind of entity until they get the patient's trust. And unfortunately, they know things that the person doesn't. I talked to scores of prisoners where when they ran out of meth, these voices would tell them where to go and when to be there to get more meth. And they would show up, and there'd be some stranger would show up with the meth. I was talking to other prisoners who the voices would tell them which houses to rob, how to enter, generally where the loot was, whether the people were up or not, and when to get out of the house. And one of the other stories I told them on Mark's show was one guy who the voices told him of a pot field up in Oregon, which he was in San Diego, and he followed him step by step all the way up to the pot field. Found the pot, sold it, bought all the drugs, all the prostitutes, all the alcohol he wanted, and the voices were fishermen, which was strange. So they wanted to go fishing, and I'm listening to this myself, going, "No, no, you're pulling my leg." But this was after he recovered, so the voices were gone when he was telling me this. And the voices would tell him where to cast this hook, how long to leave it there, and where to put it, and then when to move on. And he was the only one on the Columbia River that day catching anything. So yeah, these things are entities. They affect us all. So Sherry says every negative thought you have about yourself or anybody else, it comes from these entities. They're not your thoughts. All right.
And the thing is about it, Jerry, is that with most people who are still in control of themselves, this is kind of background chatter and the occasional intrusive thought. Like you're saying, you will have these thoughts which are completely out of character. You would never think what these thoughts are telling you to do. You would never do that normally. So these are kind of strange impulses that most people will get, and most people will understand that level of it. Some of the people in chat are kind of mixing this up a bit. What we're really talking about is voices, negative entities, I believe is what they are. And these things have been around on Earth since mankind has been here. And there's a record of this going back thousands of years. It's not really anything absolutely out of this world. It's been in this world a long time, but we're talking about something that is not in this dimension, but manifests itself through people who seem to carry out the wishes of these entities. And basically, they torment the victim, and the torment and the anger and the rage and the suffering is what these things seem to thrive on.
Yeah, they feed off of negative emotional energy. There's a few things you have to understand first. Is not all your thoughts are yours. They come from other places. You are the chooser as to which ones you want to act upon, which ones you're going to put your attention on. And the ones you put your attention on are the ones you energize. Right. So not all your thoughts are your own. You're taught as a kid, if they appear in your head, they belong to you. That's not true. You can step back and watch your thoughts flow through your head. You're not your thoughts. You are the watcher. You're the one who's watching. So you can watch this line of thoughts flow through your head, but you don't have to interact with those.
That's right. Yeah. And that's a really good point, Jerry, because once you develop your own awareness, when these intrusive thoughts come in, you see them for what they are and you're able to view them. But when they get hold of people, they make them react in the moment in an extremely negative way. And I've experienced this, as we've talked about over the years. Your experience is vast, but mine is on a personal level with certain things that have happened. And we've talked about that many times over the years. And you were absolutely right in your assumptions to start with. And I think the main thing is this: if the person who is suffering with this affliction or these entities actually takes action and positive action and works very, very strongly and has a pattern of work to basically defeat this, it can be defeated. But when it gets to a certain point, they get completely taken over. And that's when things get really dangerous, isn't it?
Yes, and I've seen that a number of times. There was one guy I worked with for over an hour just to get to the person who used to be there before the voices took over. But along with the belief that all thoughts that come into your head are yours, which is you got to pay attention to that. That is not correct. Is that the voices sound exactly like the thoughts that are going through your head on a regular basis.
I think it's
There's
something we
no
need to.
change in
We
timbre.
need.
There's no.
Sorry, Jerry. Yeah, there's a bit of a
Yeah,
delay on it. Um, in chat, someone's put, I disagree. If you were calling schizophrenia out as people being taken over by dark entities, well, we're not talking about general schizophrenia. We're talking about paranoid schizophrenia. But
right.
anybody who's seen this will know it. So if you haven't seen it, then you don't know it. It's as simple as that. Schizophrenia is a kind of hold-all term that doesn't actually mean anything. So can you sort that one out for us, Jerry?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different kinds of schizophrenia. The most prevalent kind is paranoid schizophrenia. That's the major one that affects the majority of people with schizophrenia. Then you got catatonic schizophrenia, where the person just freezes and they just stay there, for hours and hours. You got undifferentiated schizophrenia, which is just like their mind is like garbage. They can't concentrate. There's just all kinds of garbage going through there. Um, you know, they're different kinds, but the most prevalent kind, the most troublesome kind, the kind that the prisons are full of, are paranoid schizophrenics. The homeless are paranoid schizophrenics for the most part. Uh, it's the single most prevalent form. And here's the psychiatric mafia and big pharma making $235 billion a year selling drugs that just induce a chemical lobotomy, cure absolutely nothing, and rot out their brain and nervous system with long-term use, and telling people that's the only cure, that there is no cure. It's like all those, it's like the gates of hell where Dante was. All those who past this point give up all hope. That's basically what psychiatry is telling you. And anybody who comes up with something different that works, they're going to make sure nothing gets published. You can't convince them of anything. You can't talk to them about anything. They're spiritually devoid. This is a spiritual disorder. Um, and
Yes, I
it
think it
hits us
gets
all
mixed
to
up.
different
Yeah.
degrees.
I think it gets mixed up as well. The thing called borderline personality disorder. And I thought a friend of mine was suffering from this, but it does fit generally. But these terms, in a way, are kind of meaningless when we're trying to apply them to something as extreme as what we're talking about. And I think you've just explained very clearly there the different types of what's called schizophrenia. So it's good that we cleared that up, because people tend to generalize about this subject. And we're talking about something quite specific. And a lot of people have experienced this. What we're talking about is when people get to a point where they're dangerous to themselves and those around them, yet they have a cognitive ability while they're in this state to actually get through it. And they can put you in enormous danger if you become a target and get in the way and want to help these people. Could you actually go into that now?
Oh yeah, yeah. They don't like it. I mean, when I was working in the emergency rooms doing psych crisis, the hospitals didn't want you doing any therapy there. They didn't want you really trying to help these people. They wanted you to either put them in so they could milk their insurance, kick them out to free the bed, or get the mental health center to come and get them out of there. They just wanted them out of the ER. Um, they don't know how to handle these people. The police don't know how to handle these people. Doctors don't know how to handle these people, and psychiatrists just drug them. They drug them silly so they don't cause any problems. And you know, it, it's just unconscionable what they're doing. And for the most part, they don't explain the horrible side effects of these drugs. Very seldom have I seen a psychiatrist sit down and talk to the patient about these are the side effects. If this happens, it means there's neurological damage. You need to report this right away. They don't tell them anything. They say, well, you're going to feel groggy. You're going to feel your vision will probably be fogged up for a few days. You'll get used to it. You got to stay on these drugs, and that's all there is to it. It's a lifetime sentence. They'll tell them outright there is no cure. There is no other treatment than their drugs. Um,
Yes. And I think the diagnosis in some of these cases can be completely wrong. I know for a fact that when my friend went to see a psychiatrist, they diagnosed with a thing called depressive mood disorder, which hardly covered the spectrum of the behavior and the insanity that was behind it all. So, in other words, what they were isolating there was the after effects, which is the energy drain. So they get this absolute mania of energy, and the energy I've experienced and the strength of even very small women who
Oh,
get taken over by this is unbelievable.
I've seen that in
Absolutely
the prison
unbelievable. Yeah.
many times. I don't know if I told you about the one guy that uh, they had in the cell block at the Florence prison. Well, I don't know. I don't want to run out of time with you. Want me to tell
I
that
think
tale?
that's a really good example, Jerry, before we move on. Yes.
No, okay. This happened on the cell block at one of the maximum security units up in the Florence prison in Arizona. Um, the guards wanted to move this. He was a big, strong, hefty, psychotic prisoner out of his cell to another cell, and he didn't want to move. So what you had was, this big empty floor, and then you had three cell blocks piled on top of one another. He was down on the bottom cell block. So the guards come up to his cell. They goes, cuff up, we're moving you. And he goes, I'm not going anywhere. And they cuff up, we're moving you. Put your hands out, cuff up, or we're going to go get the pepper spray and we're going to douse you down. He's like, go get your freaking pepper spray. I don't care. Get out of here. So they went. They had these like quart canisters of spray pepper spray, and they had two of them. And here's this guy refused to come out, so they broke out the pepper spray. This prisoner sat down on his bed. He wrapped a towel around his face, and they just drenched him with that stuff. And any of you have had any experience with that stuff, it just burns. And if you get it on your face or your eyes, you just can't function. I mean, it brings you to the ground in agonizing pain. And they sprayed two big bottles of that in there, just drenched his whole cell with it. And he pulled that thing off his face, and he goes, screw you bastards. And he started cussing at them. And, they're like standing there amazed that he took two of these cans of this stuff. So they said, now cuff up, come on, cuff up. And they were even suffering. I mean, they sprayed so much of it that their eyes were watering and they were having trouble breathing, that it was coming out of the cell. So they said, cuff up, or we're going to go get the stun guns. So these stun guns fired an electric dart that had a little thin wire on it, and it would hit the prisoner with 50,000 volts of electricity. And man, it would hit most of them like a ton of bricks. It would bring down the biggest prisoners, and they'd just collapse. They'd be down. Uh, this guy they shot it into him after he refused to come out again. And he's telling them, come in and get me. You want me? Come on in and get me. They weren't about to do that. So they shot him up with one of those stun guns, and they hit him with 50,000 volts. And he just stood there shivering. He just stood there and just quaked. He just stood there shivering. And that would have been enough to knock most guys down. So they brought a second one, and they hit him with that. And when one was recharging, the other was discharging. So they were like hitting him, bam, 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 bam. And the warden came down during this time. And after 13 times, he said, stop it. They're going to get me for cruel and unusual punishment. And the guy still wouldn't come out. And now he was mad as a hornet. And, they're going, now they cup up and come out of there. We're going to get the dog. So now you have three tiers of prisoners looking down, watching this. And the guards couldn't lose this. I mean, they couldn't lose it. Otherwise, the prisoners would, it was an ego thing at that point. So they went and they got the dog. And these dogs, the prisoners were terrified of the dogs because they rip them to pieces. These were trained attack dogs. So they brought the dog in and they gave him another chance. They said, come on out of there. We're going to sick the dog on you. And he said, screw you. You come in and get me, you bunch of sissies, and started cussing them, insulting them. And he's sitting on his bed. They cracked the door to his cell. They sicked the dog on him. And he's sitting on his bed, and he threw up his arm in front of his face like this, and the dog clamped onto it and tried to pull him back, but he pulled the dog up to his face, and he's looking the dog in the eye, and he goes, nice puppy, nice puppy. And he starts petting the dog, and then he tells it to sit, and it sat. but it didn't let go of his arm. And the dog handler's going, "What the heaven is going on in there?" I mean, I'd never seen anything like that. So what they did is they pulled him out of that cell. The dog still had a hold clamped onto his arm, and they pulled the dog out with this leash, and the dog drug him out, and then they beat the crap out of him. You know, but that just tells you how they're supernaturally strong. They get that energy from somewhere else. And I remember talking to a devil worshiper in the prison once, and he had lots of energy. None of the others did. None of the other schizophrenics I worked with had any energy. And I asked him, "Where do you get your energy?" And he said, "They send it to me." And I said, "They send it to you for what?" "Oh, to get certain things done." And this guy kind of creeped me out. So I didn't ask him about that, because those guys do some horrendously awful stuff. But yeah, they're given that energy, especially when they're full of rage, and they become supernaturally strong. I mean, much stronger than most humans. And
Yeah.
that was a case in point.
Yeah, I've experienced it myself. And what's interesting about this that I noticed was that before an episode, a serious episode, you can actually almost see it coming over the person. Something is taking them over. And there is this incredible negative feeling that comes on. And I used to notice this and I think, oh, here we go. There's going to be an incident. And there was. But what I was interested in this particular case was the idea that it could be resolved. And because I was so involved in the situation, I simply could not do that myself. It would have taken a third party. And in the end, the person was resistant to any third party and actually got a lot worse and much more dangerous. And you did warn me about that. So I think maybe we should go now into the patterns that the voices run. And I've got a list of them here, actually, Jerry, so we can go through it. And the first one is negativity. The most common and consistent trait of schizophrenic voices, is that they are consistently negative, derogatory, insulting, abusive, and destructive. Although they may seem to be positive helpers for short periods, they invariably turn on their victims once they gain their trust and begin attacking and telling them awful things about themselves and others. So maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
Well, all of these traits, as we're going through these, think about what the deep state and the mainstream media are feeding us right now over the airways, over the television, over the radio. Watch how they match up one-to-one with each of these psychotic patterns. Now, these patterns that we're telling you about were collected over years and years from hundreds of schizophrenics I've worked with, from Sherry, from other therapists. I mean, these things stand on their own. So if any of you are working with schizophrenics or dealing with them, check this out for yourself. It's right in front of your face. It's right there. All you have to do is see it. These patterns, and you ask yourself, if the voices are hallucinations like psychiatry says they are, then why would they be consistently negative? Hallucinations are all over the place. They're positive, they're negative, they're neutral, they're crazy, they're just all over the place. There's no patterns to them. The voices are consistently, irrevocably negative. Everything they say is negative. The other thing they do is they have access to your complete memory. So they can pull up anything that you've done that you feel guilty about, and they can just keep rubbing it in your face over and over and over again. And we've all been through that. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Or what does he mean by that? Or, oh, I hope he doesn't take that the wrong way. And then it just keeps over and over and over. That's them. If they can get you feeling down, angry, fearful, depressed, then they can suck that energy off. They can only survive off of negative emotional energy. They hate positive energy. They hate the person being joyous. They hate them being happy. They hate them having relationships. They go after all relationships.
Yes. And that's something that is extremely important, because that negativity is amplified and amplified and amplified. And then it gets to the point of real danger. Also, we're going to go next into AntiReligious. Let me just read this out, actually, because I think it'll help. The voices are consistently anti-religious. They resist their victim attending church, reading the Bible, or following any other positive spiritual path. They become volatile if the patient repeats the 23rd Psalm, the Lord's Prayer, or other positive spiritual verses. One patient reported the voices reacted to the repetition of the 23rd Psalm like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. So maybe you can give us some case studies there, Jerry.
Yeah, the first question is why would a hallucination care about being anti-religious? You know, the voices can't stand church. And when I was working at the state hospital, I found that odd because I was like, well, I've been programmed to believe they're hallucinations. But here's these patterns starting appearing. Why would the voices care about if they were hallucinations? Why would they care about the person going to church? So what I found out was the strength of the voices that the patient experienced kind of had something to do with their experience with religion and the church. Most of them realized, hey, these things are evil. There's something wrong with these are negative. These are evil something. So they try to go to church. If the voices were weak, the voices would batter them all the way to church, trying to convince them not to go. But once they got in there, the voices would shut up. If the voices were moderate strength, they try to talk them out of going. They batter them all the way to the church. Uh, they they'd start talking to them when they were in the church, and when the preacher started speaking, they would interfere. They'd block out what he was saying. They'd start mocking the preacher. Um, they'd say stuff like, "Christ couldn't even save himself. What makes you think he's going to save you?" Um, and they'd interfere with the message uh, that the preacher was trying to talk about. If they were very strong, they'd actually drive them out of the church. So, I've seen people just jump up out of the pew and run out of the church. That's most likely somebody who's hearing voices that can't stand it anymore, and they get up and they jump out of there. Um, so you kind of wonder, why would a hallucination be anti-religious? And it was more than one patient who told me that the 23rd Psalm they can't stand. You know, you repeat that, it's like punching them in the face. They can't deal with it. They hate it.
I actually tried that in response to something that was going on, which was a very dangerous situation. And I also got this person to use both your and Sherry's, or Sherry really came up with the That's a Lie program. In other words, when you respond to these voices, once you know that there's a differentiation between your thoughts and these voices, then you can actually use this technique to get rid of them or silence them. In other words, when it comes into your head, you say, "That's a lie, that's not me." And I did this, and the person who I was on the other end of the phone to actually did stop cutting themselves. It was a very serious situation. They threw the knife away, but it took quite a while to get to that point. And what fascinated me about this particular case was that that wasn't a redemption. The person then actually kept with the voices, didn't reject the voices, and didn't work on it, which was incredibly disappointing and very disturbing. But yeah, that's great points there, Jerry. Energetically draining their victims. This is point number 4. After the voices attack, schizophrenics commonly report being severely energetically drained. After these attacks, victims report feeling as tired and lethargic as if they had been digging ditches in the hot sun all day. This is despite the fact that they had not done any significant physical work. Several patients reported they could feel their energy being drained during these attacks. Now, this is interesting, and it's something that I've actually come across as well. In the same case I've just talked about, the energetic draining the next day would be extreme. They wouldn't be able to move out of bed. And if you asked them anything, they would get incredibly irritable and tell you to go away and reject any help or any interaction. And that's a major thing. So there's a massive energy drain after these very violent episodes or very intense episodes, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a one-to-one correspondence. The thing is, they may notice that their energy is gone, but they can't make the correlation. So they're blocked from making the connection between the appearance of the voices and they're being drained, even though it's happened to them, thousands of times. So what I'd say to them is, if you were sitting around a fire and you stuck your hand in the fire, what was burning you? You know, they'd know it was the hand. I said, if you or the fire, I said, if you stuck your hand in the fire 1,000 times and every time you got burned, what would you think was burning you? The fire. All right. So they were able to make that correlation. But if I said, okay, you've heard the voices thousands of times in your life, they've been on you 24 hours a day, as much as they can. Each time they attack you viciously, your energy level drops down to nothing. Where did your energy go? And, like 95% of them would say, I don't know. I don't know. They could figure out the correlation with the hand in the fire, but they were being blocked from realizing that same correlation with the voices coming and their energy disappearing. The last thing that these things want you to know is that they are energetic parasites, because once you realize that, you're going to be watching out to do something about them. So if you had leeches on your arm and you knew they were parasites, you're not going to sit there and just watch those leeches suck you dry and take whatever medicine the doctor tells you and hope they drop off. You're going to go after them. You're going to pull them off of there. So that's what the voices don't want. They do not want people to realize that they are energetic parasites. But you can see this for yourself. When you get angry, when you get depressed, you can feel your energy just it vanishes. After a negative episode, after you're thinking negative for a while, or something negative happens, or a negative interaction, your energy level just drops. It drains. And when I was working with prisoners, I found that if I worked with any more than two of them who were hearing voices in a particular day, I was so drained I couldn't get anything done when I came home. I couldn't get any yard work done. I just wanted to pass out and do nothing. So I limited the number I worked with in a day. Otherwise, because I was getting drained too.
Yes, and that's something sorry, Jerry. Yeah, that's something I've noticed too, and it's exhausting. What happens afterwards is also, I don't know whether you found this, your experience is much greater than mine. You were actually dealing with patients. I was dealing with it in a personal capacity. But what I found was that after one of these very violent episodes and the gaslighting and the negativity, because these voices also attack the victim, who is the person nearest and in the vicinity, or the person who's trying to help the person who's hearing the voices. So the voices then are basically telling this person everything that they need to know about you. And they kind of find your Achilles heel. Now, a lot of people will say this is like narcissistic personality disorder. It is very similar. It's very similar to narcissistic personality disorder, but it's one step beyond that. It's much more disturbing than that. It's a physical attack. It's something that manifests in the body of the person under attack. Now, that's the person who's actually hearing the voices can attack another person energetically, and you have to be incredibly strong to stand up to that, don't you?
Well, for the physical attacks, yeah, but you're also being attacked
No,
energetically.
I meant, Jerry, the energetic attack, actually, that you feel physically. The energetic attack manifests itself physically, and that's
you
what
have
I
to
had.
know. You have to know it was there to start
Yes.
with, because most people don't notice it. And even after I cut down on the number of patients I worked with, I didn't know where that drain was coming from. I didn't know for years why I was drained if I worked with more than 2 a day. But here's a point I want to bring up real quick, because it's important. We kind of bypassed it. The voices say, I've had scores of patients ask the voices, "Who are you? What are you?" And what do you think they said?
We are you.
Yep. We are you. We are you. So they want you to believe that they are you. And if they get you to do that, then they actually become you.
Somebody's just put in, maybe schizophrenics are telepathic. That's a bit of a misunderstanding of what we're talking about. We're talking about voices that are attacking the schizophrenic. Right?
And the voices are telepathic. They know stuff that they shouldn't know.
Exactly. We've already covered that. Yeah. Let's get on to the next thing. The voices get louder after sunset. The voices consistently get louder and more prolonged after sunset, becoming most intense. Now, this is very interesting, between 3 and 4 a.m. in the morning. And I had some terrible experiences after 3 a.m. It escalated into absolute madness and mayhem after that point on several occasions.
Yeah, that's true. And they have something working when I was working in the old folks places doing psych evaluations there. They called it sundowner syndrome. So these old folks that they're suffering from Alzheimer's and dementia, that kind of stuff. After sunset, they would get out of control. That they would become very difficult to manage after sunset. Uh, and with schizophrenics, the voices usually, if they can't get you in the daytime, they invade your dreams. So you have nightmares. They want to keep you awake because if you sleep, then you have strength to fight back against them. Even if you don't know how to fight back against them, but you have strength for resistance. They don't want any resistance from you, so they want to keep the person awake so they can't sleep. So they attack 3, 4 in the morning with nightmares, and then when the person wakes up, the voices start into them. You're no good. You're stupid. And they all night. So they don't want them to sleep, and that weakens them.
Yeah, someone's just put in there, wonder why they would pick certain people. Well, we've already covered that. People who have had emotional abuse, sexual abuse, have mainly very serious drug problems, particularly methamphetamine, amphetamine sulfate. We talked to George Jagartic, who had been taking meth, didn't we? So
Yeah.
he actually conquered his voices in the end, but he was a therapist in the first place. The danger is when the person thinks the voices are actually them and they are acting just on behalf of the voices. A lot of this is down to control and awareness. And once you get that awareness, then you have regained yourself and you can then basically stop this incoming intrusion, because everybody does get it up to a point, as we were saying earlier. And in the times that we're in, it's getting worse, isn't it, Jerry?
Yeah, it is, especially with you look at these things with the um, with what the mainstream media is doing to us right now. The news is constantly negative. They're attacking churches, they're attacking religious organizations. You look at the negative emotional energy they're creating and fomenting, the division they're creating, the how they're the constant wearing down of us through their bullcrap. Um, and the next one is the voices get louder when ignored. You know, and that's one of the things that I've seen psychiatrists say to patients over and over and over again. Oh, just ignore them. They're hallucination. Just ignore them. No, they get louder when they're ignored. They will not be ignored. You can't ignore them. You know. Um,
Yes, you can maybe initiate Sherry's That's a Lie program. That's Sherry Sweeney, who you actually authored the book with, I believe. And I've read the book and it's great. And Sherry's idea does work. As I said earlier, it worked in a certain case. However, that person really did not want to conquer the voices and went along with it, kept drinking, kept getting out of control, and is now worse than ever. So, this is a personal and spiritual journey within the person. And if that person can heal this and basically be aware of what's going on, then progress can be made. But unless they reach that point, it can't be made. And that is a big problem. It's a bit like an alcoholic, really. An alcoholic just has to say, right, that's it. I'm not going to drink again, because we know what happens when I do. And
yeah.
that's
Well,
really the point, isn't it?
yeah. We can teach people what to do about these voices, how to get rid of them, but it's not quick and it's not easy and it's not fast. And they're going to get worse before they get better because they're going to fight back. They don't want you getting rid of them. So they're going to get worse and you have to weather through that. But if you have to want to get rid of them. If you have any doubts, you don't want to get rid of them, then there's nothing can be done for you. I mean, we've actually cured many people of this stuff. And if they get on a positive spiritual path and they stay there, then they stay cured. You know, but if they don't, then they relapse back. You can't have an empty mind with these things around, because they'll come in and they'll take over. One of the worst things for schizophrenics is to be bored, you know, because if they're not focusing elsewhere, these things come in and they take over. So it's a battle for their attention.
I think that's a
A
good point,
constant
Jerry.
battle for their attention. Yeah.
The devil makes work for idle hands. It's
Yep.
very, very true, because even the
Yep.
most well-intentioned people can get in trouble if they become idle. And I think a lot of this is about focus and what you put your energy and your direction in life on. It's very, very important to have these things that actually make you what you are, because when you have something attacking you in this negative fashion, then if you're just basically letting it happen, and you may then get into recreational drugs, it's only going to get worse. And someone just put into the chat about this 1111 phenomenon. It started to come in with digital clocks, really, and I started seeing it with a friend of mine in the 80s, and we actually called our band 1111. I've been looking into it a long time. The 11 is a gateway number. 11, 22, and 33. That's what the Freemasons use. But it all goes back to this belief in Kabbalah, which originated in the 12th century in the Languedoc in France, spread over to Spain. And I've done several shows on it, actually. And if you're interested in that, we've got a show called The Rosicrucian Mystery, and also shows on the Kabbalah and what it is and what it isn't, and why it isn't what they say it is. So that's really interesting. And the numerology and gematria is quite an interesting subject. So thanks for bringing that up. And yes, the 1111 phenomenon is quite an interesting one. I think it's some kind of gateway. It means that you are actually tuning into something. There's not much beyond that people really talk about in any consistent manner. If you look at books on 1111, it's usually about people who've got some, I kept seeing 1111 and then I bought a house in Spain, the end. Well, I bought this book called The 1111 Phenomenon. It's about someone buying a house, Anyway, let's get back to the patterns of the voices, and maybe people can relate to this, because it's all very typical of this kind of behavior and what happens to people when they let themselves or they get attacked. Now, I want to make this point before we move on. Someone just put in there, they got attacked in their solar plexus. I've had that a few times, things trying to get into your body and hit you. It's a force of black energy that basically almost knocks you over. And if you have your energetic awareness about you, you can just bounce it off. But the problem is, and what we're talking about is why certain people get this, is because their psyches are damaged or weak, or they're open and they let this stuff in. Some people actually let this stuff in through channeling, through all sorts of misguided behavior. And if you add alcohol to the mix or drugs, then you're asking for trouble, in my opinion and my experience. I've seen it happen a lot with people around me, and even people who had psychotic episodes, even though they don't go full on and become diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. I know people who've had absolutely crazy psychotic episodes. They've been literally out of their minds. Yeah. So yeah, should we carry on with these, Jerry?
Yep.
7 is foster self-destructive behavior. Now, this is one of the most disturbing aspects of it, when people do things that are to their detriment, when you see them harming themselves, or they're carrying out actions which are going to get them thrown in prison, or they're going to get them into massive trouble at the very least. The voices consistently advise their victim to behave in a self-destructive way that increases conflict, turmoil, and suffering. They sabotage any positive movement on the part of the patient. The intent of the voices is very different from the intent of their victims for themselves. Now, that is why I got very involved in trying to solve this problem, because I felt terribly sorry for the person. But that really wasn't what was going on, because the person was completely under the control of the voices. So what I was seeing was somebody who got in terrible trouble with the police, basically got stitched up, but made it look as though they'd committed the crime, which was almost interdimensional within itself. And I then tried to help this person and thought that they were the victim and they were vulnerable. But in actual fact, that's not the case. The person who's closest to them becomes vulnerable and becomes the victim. So I just wanted to make that point before we moved on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's covered in the next one. But
Hmm.
yeah, the self-destructive behavior. I noticed that when I worked at the state hospital, we had the Yarborough Psychiatric Rehab Center, and the purpose of that center was to get these.
You've gone off, Jerry. I can't hear you. I think yeah. I don't know why. Yeah, I can't hear you. Um,
How
that's
about
it.
now?
You're back on. Yeah, you're back on now. Yeah.
Okay, I got this little doohickey attached to the wire here. I guess I punched it.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
Let me see, what were we at?
We
The
just
self-destructive behavior.
self-destructive behavior. Yes.
Oh, yeah, I was telling you about the psychiatric rehab center where we'd give them a vocational skill. It was cosmetology or barber, or these weren't high level things, but we'd work with them and they'd get their licenses. It was a vocational school basically. But what I found out was that as they approached graduating, they would do something to screw themselves up. They'd get in some kind of trouble to get thrown out of class, or something. They'd stop taking their meds. They'd leave the hospital. They'd do something to sabotage themselves, and it was over and over and over again. And the success rate was they had to be on meds and hold a job for 6 months, and then they considered that a successful closure. What I found is most of them, once they left the hospital, they went off their meds and they lost their jobs. So I was going, why are they constantly sabotaging themselves like that? And it took me years to find out. It's the voices telling them to do that. They want them to feel worthless and stupid, and um, they don't care about how they get this negative emotional energy that they feed off of. It's easier for them to tell lies than it is to tell the truth. So 95% of what they tell these people and what they tell us in general are lies. It's easy to make up a lie, and if the person buys it, then for them it becomes real. And the voices might say, "Oh yeah, they're laughing behind your back." And you look and here's some people over there laughing, and the voices want you to believe they're laughing at you. You buy into that, and then you're upset, and then they drain that energy. So they don't care how they get that negative emotional energy, and they will use your memories against you. So if you got a bunch of garbage built up in there, you got to clean it out. Um, you can't just get rid of them and not clean that out. Uh, I've seen people do that. They got rid of the voices. They didn't deal with the stuff that they had built up inside. They got bored, and these things came back. And not only did they just come back, they came back with reinforcements, just like the Bible said. Once they got bored, they came back with two or three of their into the empty house with two or three of their friends, and it was much worse. So they want to foster isolation. They don't want you to have friends. They don't want you to have family. They don't want you to have any kind of positive relationship. They'll foster relationships with bad people, but they don't want you to have any positive relationships. Um, so they tell the victim to isolate themselves, lock themselves in the room, that people are after them, stay away from people. Um, and look what the mainstream media is doing right now. Oh, stay away from people. You're 6 feet away. You can't have Christmas. You can't have Thanksgiving. You can't talk to people. But wear those masks. It's the same crap. I mean, it's a one-to-one correlation between what the psychotics are hearing from their psychotic voices and what the mainstream media is doing to us right now. It's the same thing. It's the same
Exactly.
entity on a macroscopic level. And people need to
Yes.
wake up.
That's right. And it's gaslighting by the media all the way.
All the
And
time.
basically, it's all deception. That's what I was talking about at the beginning of the show. The UN now want to control the narrative on all of what they are calling science, which is laughable because they have never presented science to the public. They present basically computer modeling and assumption, which is untrue, which is all brought to them by their paid lobbyists. But that's called science now. And we're not allowed to argue with that. And that's very similar to what these voices do. In other words, they gaslight you, they accuse you of what they're doing,
Yeah.
which is really shocking when they turn around to you and go, you're evil, why are you doing this to me? And you're trying to help them. And it's a very, very shocking thing to hear and see. And also, it turns other people against you when you're trying to help somebody. It's incredible. It is actually much worse for the people who these possessed people actually turn on. It's much worse for the people that they turn on, because if they get you in a room or in a situation where they can the voices manipulate them into manipulating you in front of people, it can look to other people as though you are the tormentor, which is gaslighting 100%. It's absolutely incredible. Yes, Wetico virus. It's the same thing. I think that I think Paul Levy talks about that. But yeah, we've gone through fostering isolation now, and let's get on to number 9. Demand the attention of victims. The voices constantly work toward controlling the attention of their victims to increase their control over the victim. They constantly maneuver in a myriad of ways to snag and command the attention of their victim, then direct them to behave in a negative, self-defeating, self-destructive manner. And that is the tragedy of the whole thing. You see people who may be in a position where their lives can be perfect, and they destroy it and turn it into hell, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And if you think those thoughts belong to you, and you're in trouble. Like Sherry said, any negative thought about yourself or anybody else is coming from them, and they want you to believe that all those thoughts are your thoughts, and they're not. You're in trouble. So they're constantly after fighting for the attention of the schizophrenic patient. They're yelling, they're screaming, they're insulting, they're doing whatever they need to do to grab that attention, because with that attention, they can turn that into negative emotional energy. But if they're blotted out, like George talks about that in the interview we did with him, where he actually overtalked them. He made up nursery rhymes. He made up gibberish words. He actually would work to block them out so their message could not get through. And they hated that. They were really frustrated with it. So they're like fishermen, and they're very dangerous because they have complete access to your memory. So they can see, you got in trouble here, or this bad thing happened. So they can bait the hook with that memory, and they can throw it at you into your consciousness, and it explodes in your consciousness, and you see it. And it's upsetting, but if you bite on it and you start beating yourself over the head with it, then it's generating the negative emotional energy that they want.
Yes. Someone just put in, do you know what borderline personality disorder means? It's the constant struggle of being sane or mad. Well, that's a generalized way of looking at it, but there are actually very good definitions and studies on what they call borderline personality disorder. But these are, of course, just terms. The point being that what we're talking about is the difference between classed as sane or insane. These are the definitions that society uses, but we're talking about where does all this cross over? What is the cause of it? That's what we're getting to. We're getting to the root cause of what is really going on here. Okay, maneuver for increased control over victims. Sorry, Jerry, you're going to say something then?
Yeah, let me inject one thing. All these diagnoses that psychologists and psychiatrists treat as if it's the Bible, as if these things actually exist, like diabetes or high blood pressure or something that they can actually measure and have tests for. Every single one of those diagnoses in the DSM-4 has been made up. There is not a single test anywhere that proves the existence of any of these. And there's 297 of them right now. And they make them up just like in a tobacco barn. That one guy comes, oh, I got a new psychiatric illness, and he said the symptoms are this, and all the rest of them listen and they vote on it. So they vote these diagnoses into existence. They vote them out of existence. So they had Southern Bell syndrome. I think they had in there at one time. They voted that out. Mental retardation. They voted that out. Homosexuality, that was a mental illness in their thing at one time. They voted that out. But every time they meet, they vote in more of these diagnoses. And basically what these things are used for is for the insurance companies. So they can put down a diagnosis to be paid. So the more mental illnesses they have, the more the drugs that big pharma comes up and go, oh yeah, we got a drug for that, and it gorks you out and it doesn't cure anything. None of their drugs cure anything. They're basically band-aids that they're putting on a festering sore. So these diagnoses, they're made up. They're absolutely made up. They do a good job at describing certain segments of behavior, but they don't have a single test to prove any of these. None of them.
That's right. Gaslighting. I think we've covered that. The voices are capable of gaslighting, causing their victims to doubt their sanity through the use of psychological manipulation. And someone's just put into chat, we've already covered this. They asked why or what are you defining the voices as? What are they? Well, the voices are what the person is suffering from, and they work to patterns, and that's what we're saying. So in other words, they have a kind of workbook, and it's all negative, and they are the voices or the entities that attach themselves to people. And whether you want to call them demonic entities, which I do, or you think that they are some kind of interdimensional thing, it really doesn't matter how you define this. What we're talking about is the negative impulse that comes into someone's brain that has an effect on them and ultimately takes control of that person.
And one thing that's tricky, and I didn't realize this for years either until I prayed to hear them, and I actually did, is they sound just like all the other thousands of thoughts that go through your head in a normal day, for the most part. What's the difference is the intent. The intent of that thought is very different from the intent of the person having it, unless they believe that those thoughts belong to them. So that's one way to tell them apart from your thoughts is the intent. If the intent is negative and destructive, they're not your thoughts.
Yeah. And they get more and more negative, more and more destructive, but they run patterns and they have an agenda. They have it worked out what they're going to do. That's what we're saying. So it's not just random crazy behavior. We're not talking about sane or insane. These people can be perfectly sane when they want to. Through the voices. The voices, I've seen this happen. I've had to get assistance for someone who's having a crazy episode. As soon as any form of authority arrives, they're good as gold. And they make it look as though you've been in the wrong, you've overreacted, and you shouldn't have done it.
Yep. I've run into that a bunch of times in the prison when the psychiatrist was around. These guys can maintain for like 20, 25 minutes. Normal as anybody else. You can't tell anything, and then when the psychiatrist leaves, then they go off, and the guards would go nuts because this one prisoner that he was driving the whole cell block nuts by doing that. The psychiatrist show up and he'd look normal as day. They wouldn't put him on any meds, and then as soon as he left, they'd start screaming and ranting and raving and causing pandemonium on the cell block. So there's one day I had to actually set him off when the psychiatrist was on his way, just so the psychiatrist could see what he was actually up to.
Yes, I had that numerous occasions. It's really disturbing, and it makes you incredibly tired out, and also it completely wipes your brain when this stuff happens because you are getting thrown from one situation into the next, and you are incapable of actually doing anything about it. So in other words, you are the one that seems mad when you're trying to control what's happening to this person who's hearing these voices, right?
Especially when they maintain and they can look completely normal, and you're all racked out because of what you just went through.
Absolutely. You're staring into space. Absolutely flat out, and they're okay.
They're like, he's the nut. He's the nut. I've run into that. I don't know how many times I've run into that.
That's what happened to me.
Over
many years.
I was used to it.
Yeah.
I had to be careful not to put myself in that situation.
Yeah, well, in a personal level, I mean, as soon as the situation had calmed down and say the relative had gone, it would be hell would break loose as soon as that bloody door was closed.
Yeah.
Look what you've done now.
Well, the other thing is they're easy to set off.
Yes.
Most people don't want to do that, but they're easy to trigger. But people aren't going to like, especially psychiatrists. They're not going to like you triggering these guys. Their assault rate from schizophrenics is 3 to 5 times higher than any other doctor or nurse. Their assault rate is equivalent to attendants who work on 24 hours a day around these people. So psychiatrists are being assaulted at a rate higher than any other staff that works with schizophrenics.
Yeah. Let's go on to the next one now, manipulating perception. I think we've kind of covered this in a way, but it's really a very important point, isn't it? The voices are capable of causing their victims to interpret situations and information coming in from the environment wrongly to increase negative emotion. This is a real important one, I think, and one that I experienced several times, well, numerous times, but through several different people.
All
For
people do.
instance, yeah, for instance, a schizophrenic may see a police car drive by their house, and the voices immediately jump in and tell a victim the police are searching for them for some fabricated crime. That's paranoia, obviously. But obviously, what it does is goes a lot further than that. So the voices are capable of causing their victims to interpret situations and information coming from the environment wrongly to increase the negative emotion. Now, that is very common, isn't it?
Yeah, oh, very common. Like the life I'm behind a person's back, or maybe I said the wrong thing, or somebody reacts in the way you don't expect, and you kind of go, "Well, I wonder what I said wrong," or stuff like that. The worst one I've seen was one guy where the voices had convinced him that, or almost convinced him that he had murdered somebody, and he wasn't sure that he had or not because he was so messed up he couldn't trust his own memory. So they had him in a catch-22. If he turned himself in, then they'd lock him up because, hey, you're crazy. You didn't murder anybody. You know, and if he did murder somebody and they were out looking for him and he doesn't want to be caught. So here he is caught in this catch-22 where the negative emotional energy is just being generated constantly from whichever direction he went into. And the psychiatrist had him so drugged up he couldn't even see straight. So he couldn't even figure it out.
Yeah. Let's carry on to the next one now. They have complete access to the schizophrenic's memory. We've kind of covered this. The
We covered
voices
that.
have complete access to their victim's entire memory. They utilize this ability to pull up every negative and guilt-ridden behavior the individual has ever experienced. They then rub these shameful behaviors in their faces to generate negative emotional energy on which they feed. Several patients have reported that their voices have dredged up negative things they had done decades prior and long forgotten. We kind of brought that up. Is there anything you want to add to that one?
No, that's pretty clear. I mean, they can pull up stuff
Yeah.
that the actual patient had long forgotten, hadn't remembered or brought up in decades. You know, as
Yes.
long as they can generate negative emotional energy out of it, they'll pull it up and they'll throw it in your head.
Someone said, basically, they're talking about it as a form of exorcism, is what you're doing. Now, it's not as simple as that, is it? Because an exorcist carries out something that is very, very traumatic for both the person who's undergoing the exorcism, and it takes a lot out of the exorcist. And you were in close proximity to these people. You were there as a psychiatric practitioner. Now, what's interesting about this is exorcism does seem to work, but when people get to that last stage of what you'd call demonic possession, it's extremely dangerous for everyone around them, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and I wonder about that too because if you can, I mean, I can temporarily help somebody get rid of those things for a short period of time without doing anything other than mental work. But the thing is, if they don't do the work themselves, if they don't understand how to get
Mhm.
rid of these things themselves, so they can pull this stuff up and hit the voices with it every time they show up. They've got to do the work themselves. There's no way around it. We can
Yes,
show them how to do it. We can show them what to do, but they've got to want to get rid of those voices. And if they don't, there's nothing that can be done.
that's
Yeah.
the main key point. That is the main point. It has to come from the person who's the victim, the person who's actually undergoing this takeover of their time, their body, their whole
Yeah.
psyche. And really it is about time, isn't it? Because what they're doing is they're using your time on planet Earth to manifest absolute negativity and problems everywhere they go.
Yeah. Yep, they're feeding off of you to cause you problems and your entire family. So you think, oh, it's just the schizophrenic. No, it's not just the schizophrenic. It's their bosses, it's their wives, it's their kids, it's everybody who's around them, their friends. They cast a negative pall on all those people, probably 10 times just the turmoil they themselves experience. It affects a whole wide array of other people around them, who don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, someone's put in. Actually, I was going to try and look at this, and I can't look at it. It's come back again now. Dan Winter claims that his science of bliss can eradicate any and all parasites from the human body by achieving a state of bliss. Sounds a bit new age to me. It might be the cure for voices. Well, the point is that any positive impact that can be made on the person is going to help, but I don't think trying to induce a state of bliss in somebody who's hearing this stuff and is in an advanced state of being taken over can work. They have to actually be fighting this stuff consciously. You can't just actually get rid of it. That's what we're talking about. These things are an intrusion that take over. So going into a state of bliss does not really go anywhere near what we're saying, does it, Jerry?
No, they're not going to allow you to induce any kind of state of bliss. They don't want you to feel good. They don't want you to be happy. They don't want you to be joyous. So one of the things I recommend for my patients that they hate, aside from repeating the 23rd Psalm when they hear them, is to watch an hour or two of America's Funniest Videos or some comedy show where they'll laugh for a couple of. These things hate laughter. They hate the person being happy. They don't want them being happy. They don't want them doing anything good for themselves at all. Um, and they don't want people telling others about them either. And you look what
Yeah.
happens to a lot of them. They tell their friends, and their friends go, "Oh, you're a wacko. Something's wrong with you. We're getting away from you." So they lose all their friends. And the voices tell them this: you tell anybody about us, they're going to lock you up. They're going to fill you with meds, put you on a psych ward. Unfortunately, that's what happens. They
Yeah,
walk
well, I've
into
had it the
this.
other way, Jerry. I mean, it's absolutely appalling because I've had these violent episodes and I've had to try and defend myself, calm the person down. They're saying the police are on the way. The police are on the way. You're going to jail. And you're going, this is like a horror film, you know? It's absolutely the epitome of evil. Someone's just put up an interesting point, actually. Listening to you both, you're describing my girl. When she's deep in crisis, I see her eyes turn black. Now, I've seen that.
Oh, yep.
That is
That's not a
that
good
is
sign.
scary. That's scary.
Yep. That's
And I
scary.
really mean that. Her physical appearance changes. It's horrendous. I've seen the same thing. And I've
Yep.
actually seen an entity on this person's face. And I've tried to remove it. The problem is, as we've said, the person has to want it to go. They have to will it to go. And they have to know that they're under attack. Otherwise, it's absolutely a waste of time. And
Well,
that
we can.
is the sad thing about it. Yeah.
Yeah, we can walk them out of it. If they
Yes.
want, if they
If they
want, if
want,
they're
yes.
willing and willing to fight for their sanity, we
Yeah.
can walk them out of. They will be cured when they're done, but they have to stay on a positive spiritual path and they have to change their frequency. I mean, it can be done. There is a cure for schizophrenia. It's not fast, it's not easy, but we've done it over and over and over again.
Yes. And of course, this negative impulse and action that is a result of this slowly over time, or it can actually even quicken very fast. But generally, what I found was that it was an ongoing process. And the stage that this person that I've been trying to help now is very advanced. When I met her, she was having these rages every 2 weeks, then it became every day, then it became just part of the personality. And the whole point is it doesn't matter how much you want to help them. If they don't want to help themselves, you can't do it. And now I know that after 5 years of trying. It's a very difficult thing to deal with. And I think people sometimes mix up what this is with what they think is going on, and they try and equate it maybe to certain experiences that they've had, which don't really cover what we're talking about. So we're not really talking about things like electronically induced voices going into people's heads, even though that is possible. What we're talking about is something that's consistent, that's there all the time, that becomes part of the person. So, in other words, it's not like the lone gunman who suddenly gets the impulse to shoot somebody like in the movies. We're talking about an ongoing debilitation of that person spiritually, mentally, and physically. And
Yep.
that's very important, I think, Jerry. But yeah,
Yep.
let's get on to 14. The demand the victim not tell others about their presence. This is an interesting one. The voices warn their victim not to speak to others about them or what they say to them, warning that if they do, others will think they're crazy and they will be shunned or locked up. If the victim has someone they trust who is willing to listen, this dissipates the negative emotional state. This is a good one.
Yeah, and one thing we've done, Sherry, I, and a fellow over in Germany, we created on our Facebook page a Hearing Voices support group, just so these people could talk to one another about their voices because they can't talk to anybody else about them. So we've got over 700 people on there right now, all sharing stories about their voices and what they did about them and what worked for them and what didn't work for them. But they're not bottled up now. They can speak, because if they tell a psychiatrist, he's going to drug them silly. They tell their parents going to worry sick about them. They're going to try to, kind of discipline them and bring them into control, and that it's going to get worse. Then they're going to end up taking them to a psychiatrist who's going to drug them silly and rot out their brains with their drugs. But uh, those drugs, they do weaken the voices. They won't get rid of them in most cases, but they weaken them. And in cases where the voices are so strong that I can't reach the patient without those drugs, if they take the drugs, then in a lot of cases I'll be able to reach them and bring them back to the point where they don't need those drugs and keep them going. But it's all up to them. I mean, they have to do the work, and it's a lot of work, and it's not easy, and it's not fast, but it can be done.
Yes, it can be done, and that's why we're doing these shows, because I think people will get a lot out of this if they know what we're talking about. People who are just sort of listening to it and don't really get what we're talking about haven't experienced it. So it's something that's not that uncommon, and most people have experienced it in some way or other. These psychotic episodes that people have are a similar thing, but that means that something's come into that person for a very short period of time, or they've become negatively influenced, and they are able, through their own strength of character, to pull out of it. What we are talking about is people who've had maybe trauma, sexual abuse, especially drug abuse, especially methamphetamine and amphetamine, crack cocaine. All of these drugs cause this to manifest itself in a much more horrendous way. And then there's all those hallucinogenic kind of creatures that people talk about, the tree people. And can you tell us a bit about that, Jerry? Because that's something that meth addicts talk about, isn't it?
Well, meth addicts and schizophrenics, they
Mm.
both see them. I'm not quite sure what they are. In a lot of cases, they're three-dimensional shadows that are darker than the rest of the room at night. Um, the meth addicts who are in worse shape will see their eyes, and their eyes are usually lime green or red, which isn't a good color for eyes. Um, I've never heard them hurt anybody. I've talked to one patient where they felt them walk through them, and they could feel them walk through them. Um, there was one scary one, where I actually met one of those things through, like you were saying, Mark, with you're looking at the face and the eyes turn dark. But for the most part, as far as I know, the Indians called them the Watchers. So they scare the bajingas out of you because they walk through walls. They appear in your bedroom. They're darker than the rest of the room. Sometimes they don't even take on a human shape. They'll take on a black cloud or an animal or some crazy little creature. Um, but they're associated with meth use. Any meth addict can tell you about the shadow people, and schizophrenics see them too. I've seen them out of the corner of my eyes at times, where that's how most people see them. You see something dark that kind of wishes by, and you look and you try to focus, and there's nothing there. So I don't know exactly what they are. There's a lot of write-ups on the internet about the shadow people. They're a different kind of entity. They don't cause schizophrenia. They never speak. I've only heard one patient that said they speak, and that was a meth addict who'd been injecting for 10 years. He'd been injecting meth. He should have been dead, you know, a decade ago by the time I met him in the ER. That's a real strange story, that one, but that takes some time to tell. I don't want to get into another story here and we miss out on some of our stuff here.
Yeah, we've got one now that's really interesting and very useful, and about how to counter the voices and maybe literally snap out of this programming, this invasion for long enough to bring the person back to some kind of reality. And this could be very useful if something serious is going on or about to happen. Stunned by shock of snapping a rubber band on the wrist, once the voices increase in strength, they dominate the thought stream of their victim. The victim must take action to disrupt the process. Putting a rubber band on the patient's wrist and snapping it hard stuns the voices into a short, temporary silence, allowing space for the victim to repeat the 23rd Psalm or implement procedures designed to weaken and short circuit the voice. So this basically buys a bit of time, doesn't it?
Yeah, what I've found is they start off very softly and then they get louder and louder. And since they've been in the patient's head for decades, they don't pay any attention to that. It's a very slippery psychological state. So they start off very softly and then that commands attention to listen to them. Then they get louder and louder. Once they get their attention, they almost there's almost like this hypnotic trance that they put the person in. And the first time I realized that was a suicidal prisoner who was telling me his story. The voices had convinced him that his life was worthless and he should just end it all. So he jumped into his car that had a partial tank of gas. He brought a pistol with him, and the voices told him, when you run out of gas, stop and shoot yourself. So he drove his car out into the desert, kept going till he ran out of gas. When he ran out of gas, he grabbed the pistol. He went out into the desert. He cocked the pistol. He put it to his head, and he said there was a bird that came out of nowhere, and it was on a rock, and it started screaming at him uh, for some odd reason. He said he'd never seen a bird like that in Arizona before, and he'd lived here all his life. So that was a weird incident. So he said he cocked the gun and he fired at the bird, and the explosion of the bullet, the round going off, woke him up out of this trance. And he looks at the gun in his hand and he goes, "Oh my God, what was I going to do?" It was like he was hypnotized into going to about shoot himself. And uh, yeah, then I was reading a book by this was a dentist in the 1920s where they were working with schizophrenics. The wife was a psychic, and the dentist found that if he'd administered a static electric shock, the voices would temporarily jump out of the person's body, and then the wife would pick up on them and talk them into the light. And if she did that, that voice was gone for forever. It was gone for good. And I experimented with that, and that does work if you can get them to do that. A lot of times you can't. Uh, but they put the person into a kind of a hypnotic state, and that rubber band snap will wake them up and break that trance that they kind of train that person into a negative mental repetition of something or other where they just get wrapped
Yeah,
up in that
it breaks the
negativity.
pattern, it breaks the loop. We're talking about
Yep.
patterns
Yep.
here, aren't we? That's the
Yep.
whole point. So someone's put in something quite interesting here, Jerry. Can some of the voices tell people to have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, or those tendencies, like touching the light switch multiple times or doorknobs? Now, that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because I think most people at times in their life have this, and it's usually put down to some form of anxiety, but very
Yeah.
interesting point there.
Yeah. And you look at your thoughts behind that. What it is it's kind of like a fight for control. The
Yes.
person is trying to control their environment because their life is kind of out of control in a lot of cases. Um, it can be a useful trait if you have control of it, kind of sticking with something but in a lot of cases of OCD, it's just this anxiety that builds up and you're trying to do something with it. So what they do is set a pattern, washing their hands, or pacing back and forth, or doing some repetitive behavior, or cleaning the house so everything is in order. Um, that kind of stuff. What needs to be looked at is the thought process that's going on behind these mental illnesses, and that's something that psychiatry and psychology have completely ignored. They just ignore it. They'll do a great description. Oh, it looks like this. This is what it looks like, but they have no idea what to do about it, and
No,
they don't look into the thought processes that drive it. It's insane
no,
what they're doing.
they don't want the cure. They just want to treat the symptoms.
Yep, because they're making a lot of money on those
Right.
symptoms. A lot of
That's
money.
what it is. The voices are consummate liars and cannot be trusted to keep any bargain made with their victim. They are masters of deceit, lies, and deception. For example, they told one psychiatric patient they had been incessantly tormenting that if he poked out an eye, they would leave forever. After he had poked out an eye and disfigured himself for life, they returned to laugh at him for being so stupid as to trust them. The voices will use a constant stream of deceptive and upsetting lies to manipulate the perception of their victim in a negative manner to generate negative emotional energy. This is serious stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, you can't trust anything they
No.
say. Nothing. Um, you can't make any bargains with them because you just can't trust them. They're so deceptive, and there's different degrees of intelligence among them too. Some of them are very stupid. They'll do stuff like just torment the person with, hey you, hey, and that's what they'll do. Just kind of drive the person nuts that way. But George's voices were extremely sly. They were some of the slyest that I've ever encountered. Because George he's very intelligent, and they threw him off track several times. Where had we not caught it, he would have been stuck with the voices at that point. So they're very sly. They're very tricky, and it doesn't matter how they generate that negative emotional energy to them. If they can generate it with a lie, that's all fine and good for them. It only takes them a second to manufacture a lie and try to get you to believe it. But if you fall into it, they got you. You know, and like I
Yes.
said, they hit us all.
Mm. And especially now with what's going on, we're being
Yeah, especially now.
gaslighted by basically the voices of the media, which is the same. They're the
Yep.
same as these entities, aren't they?
Right.
They do exactly the same thing. They basically
Exactly the
lie
same
to
thing.
you. They say you're wrong. They say you've got to follow what they're doing, and they're deceiving you.
Yeah, and look at the suicide rate now.
Yeah.
It is soared astronomically. You know, that they like that kind of stuff. A lot of misery is being generated, and that's what they want. Look at the state they've thrown the world into. They
Yes.
all ought to be hung by their gonads, man. All of them.
Yeah, well, we do try and bring them into the public eye and describe exactly what they're doing, why they're doing it, and who's doing it. That's what our shows are about. And that show with George was brilliant, actually. We did it about a year ago. You can go back into Windows on the World archive, and it's myself, George, and we did one with Sherry as well, I think. So I think we
Yeah,
did two with
I think
George,
so.
didn't we? And he conquered his voices, which is absolutely fascinating. And he taunted them in the end, and he had
Yeah, that's
complete
right.
control back of his own psyche. Brilliant.
Yeah, it took 6 months or so to off and on with him, but he was very motivated.
Mm,
It's a pleasure to work with people who are motivated because it's a battle. You're
mm,
fighting for your sanity, and we can give you a roadmap and we can walk you through it, and we can pick up when they've thrown you off track,
mm.
but they got to do the work. There's no way around it.
That's right.
There is no miracle cure. There is no pill. You know, exorcisms are only temporary for the most part, from what I've seen. Um,
Constant vigilance, but not to the point of obsession, but being completely aware of your own energetic field. These are things that I think are really important because there are times when I could have got sucked into some of the terrible things that were happening around me. And it was only through this awareness and discipline that I'd learned and basically been vigilant, but not hyper vigilant all the time. You need to be hyper vigilant when you need to be hyper vigilant, but not to be obsessive, but to have this relaxed awareness, which is very similar to the 0
yeah,
to 4 hertz frequency of basically the awareness where the body is asleep and the mind is awake. That is a deep form of relaxation. And that is where this stuff kind of meets your inner psyche. And that is what most people don't have. And the chatter of social media, the nonsense that goes on around them, the constant need for attention, the narcissism of the age, the compulsion to put your dinner onto Facebook and all the rest of this crap, and taking pictures of yourself singing silly songs and putting them on TikTok is all part of this major distraction. In other words, it's all about prioritizing what's important, because I think that really helps. Having a strong commitment to do what you need to do and to be committed fully is a way around a lot of the possible intrusion that can happen. Because if you have a strong purpose, then it's much harder for these entities to get in and defeat you. Would you say that, Jerry?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, yeah. If you had a strong purpose and goals, and you were working toward those goals, and they were positive goals, and you were involved with positive people, and occupied doing positive things, they have a much harder time.
yeah. I'm just reading this. Yeah, I was put on amphetamines, Dexedrine, when I was 11 or so. It took only for 6 to 8 months. I see. I took it for 6 to 8 months, stopped because it made me a zombie. No energy. It seems like created a war within my head. Yeah, well, we have covered that actually. Amphetamines or amphetamine substitutes would do that because they actually affect the nervous system as well. That's another point, isn't it?
Yeah.
So let's move on now. The voices consistently steer their victim away from anything that might generate joy. They drive the victim away from any positive activity that might make them feel good about themselves. They will make the victim forget good memories and concentrate on bad ones. And have I seen that? The trauma that these people go through sometimes is incredibly upsetting and disturbing. But then, of course, they turn on you because the voices don't want you to help them.
Right. Yep. That's pretty clear. That's how it is.
Mm. The voices can manipulate feeling without speaking. The voices can move in and make the victim feel bad without any noticeable cause. If they can prolong the negative state, it darkens the victim's world and incites the negative thinking. Do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah. I've ran into that. George has run into that, where you're just sitting around minding your own business, and all of a sudden you get this dark, depressive feeling.
Mm.
Where'd that come from? Nothing actually happened to cause it. And I'm aware of it. I know it's them. I know it's them. So you take action against that, and get them out of there, because if you feel bad, you start thinking bad, and vice versa. If you think bad, you start feeling bad. So, you know, it's a loop, and it has to be broken at some point. You either
Yeah, we're
break it
talking
mentally or
about
you break
breaking
it.
the cycles here, aren't we?
Yes.
That's what we're really trying to get to, is that this is a cycle and it's a negative spiral which goes downwards. It
Yep.
won't go upwards. It will
Right.
never go up.
Not
And
on
that
its
is
own.
the thing. No. So it has to be elevated with hard work and focus.
Right.
I think
And they
that's
can't.
what
They
we,
can.
yeah,
They can pull themselves out of it, but past a
yeah,
certain point, that they're gone.
mm,
You're never going to reach them again, even with meds.
yeah.
If the voices bring them beyond a certain point, you can't reach them. The person who was there is no longer there.
Somebody's put into chat, what about Tourette's? This is when people can't stop swearing. And I know a couple of people who've got it, but it's not like being taken over by anything negative. It's a nervous disposition, which actually is quite negative, but I don't think it's what we're talking about. What do you want to expand on that, Jerry?
I don't know.
Hmm,
I've seen people with it, but I've never worked with them,
hmm,
so I don't know. I can't answer that one.
yeah.
It's strange that they would react that way. That they just
Yes.
tick and swear. I mean, why would they swear and curse and that kind of stuff? Why wouldn't they say good stuff like you
Yeah,
know?
that's a really good point. And I remember seeing a TV show about it and it had the people doing it. And in some ways, it's quite comedic because it's so inappropriate what they do. But it's very, very disturbing. And it is
Yeah.
almost like a momentary intrusion, isn't it?
Right, right. And
Yeah.
and then that's another one where it's a constant negative pattern. And you
Mm,
go, why would it be constantly negative? Why
mm,
wouldn't it be, some range of vocalizations, instead of just negative stuff.
Yeah. Someone said it's not just swearing. No, it's not just swearing, but that's one of the most kind of common evidences of it, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep.
Short circuiting of reason. The voices short circuit reason by urging a negative knee-jerk reaction to stressors of perceived slights. Yeah. Hang on, where am I? Yes. Yeah, often damaging relationships. The voices jump on and take advantage of anything that goes wrong in the victim's life to feed and inflame the situation to keep their victim focused on the negative situation. Short circuiting of reasoning, that is a big one, isn't it? Because
Yeah, that's a big
that
one.
is a real problem when you're trying to get through to someone who's having one of these episodes, and that's when they start attacking you.
Yeah, and when we beat them back and they start losing ground, what they do is they wait in the background for something bad to happen to the patient, and when that happens, they jump in there and they just pour gas on the fire. So
Yeah.
they're what do you call it? Opportunistic.
Yes. Boredom is bad. If victims allow themselves to become bored, the voices will quickly move in, fill the void, and destructively dominate their victim's thought process. Now, brought this up before, the devil makes work for idle hands. There's nothing truer than that.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. The voices try to pass themselves off as thoughts belonging to the victim. The voices disguise themselves as their victim's thoughts. This is a really important one, making it difficult to identify them as the enemy. They often sound just like the thousands of thoughts that appear in the patient's mind daily, but their intent is to drive their victim into a negative direction. Many patients have asked their voices, "Who are you?" The response given is always the same: "We are you." One of the most effective ways of ferreting out which thoughts are the victims from those inserted by the voices is for the victim to ferret out their personal intent from that of the voices. The intent of the patient for themselves is significantly different and often more positive than the intent of their voices. Now, that's what I've seen in moments of breakdown after these very violent episodes, where they almost go back to normal and they're basically asking for help. Do you want to carry on, Jerry?
Yeah, they realize in a lot of cases what they did, but in a lot of other cases they were
Yeah,
completely taken over, and they have no memory of what they did.
exactly. And that's what I've experienced. And that was the horrific thing, that the person could wake up with cuts and bruises all over them and the damage everywhere, and they wouldn't remember anything. They'd get up as though nothing had happened.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like an
yeah,
alcoholic blackout. They just, what
yes,
happened? What happened?
yeah.
They're not in control at that point. It's somebody else, something else that's driving them, and they just don't realize it.
Selective forgetting. This is a really good point. The voices divert their victims' attention away from any therapeutic activity designed to oppose and weaken the voices, including forgetting to take their medications and keeping appointments. Now, I saw this. Positive things that could happen in these people's lives, they would forget the appointment. They wouldn't turn up, say, "Well, I can't go. I don't feel well." Anything to get out of it, anything to go back into the downward spiral.
Yeah, and I've seen one guy that I remember well, a prisoner who we got rid of his voices totally. I mean, it was the first time in decades that he had heard silence in his head, and he was so lonely that he went and looked for him back. Then they came back and they kicked his butt, and now he's psychotic to this day. He didn't want them gone because he was too lonely. They were the only ones he had to talk to.
Stephen Watson, spirits. What is drink? Well, that's why they call it spirits, don't they? Evil
Yep.
spirits, the demon drink. Well, we've all seen people who are under the effects of the demon drink. The person who is okay 1 second, next minute they want to fight you, or they've completely misinterpreted what you're saying. But what we're saying is that when these things actually take over full time, then it's a full time occupation and it's only going downhill. People who are alcoholics have these blackouts, and often they have remorse afterwards. Go, "God, did I do that?" But we're talking about these advanced states where people won't remember what they've done, and it will be blacked out. And the things that happen on drink are very, very bad indeed. But we're talking about that when it's on a daily basis and it's on as an ongoing part of the person's psyche and nothing to do with anything external like booze. Booze, of course, can be a gateway to make it 100 times worse, of course. Yeah. Thanks, Steve. Glad you're in, Steve. Anyway, cheers. Yeah, destruction. Wait a minute. Fill the victims with negative thoughts. Yes, we've done that one. Oh no, we haven't actually. This is just moving on. The voices will cause the victim to be drawn to violent movies, horror movies, murder mysteries, pornography. Now that is true, isn't it? That's obviously you know it's true, but I've seen that is true. Yeah.
Yeah, you look at the stuff the prisoners look at. You know, the psychotic prison. It's all horrible stuff. It's murder movies and murder mysteries and war stories, and they're drawn to that. It feeds these things.
Yes.
And then you look at TV. Look at what they put on TV. Everything's violent. Everything's murder. You know, hey, the way to solve problems: get a gun and go shoot somebody. You know, look at what they're doing. Look at what they're doing.
Yeah, that's why I haven't had a television for 15 years, but mainly the gaslighting through the news media is the worst thing that's happening, obviously, with COVID. But when people watch these things, I think, well, what are they watching them for? One, they're not learning anything from it. Two, they're wasting their time. And three, they're putting negative energy into their psyches.
That's right.
There's nothing good about it. It's a complete waste of time.
Well, other than it is negative. You know, it fills their psyche with negative stuff, and that draws more negative stuff. You know, the way you think draws people and situations to you. So if you fill your head with negative crap, more negative crap comes.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting one. I used to live in a flat in London, and the chap upstairs was an actor, and he started out being fine, very easygoing, nice personality. His personality completely changed, probably with what he was smoking, but more importantly, his addiction to these war games. It turned him into, at best, a spoiled child, smashing the place up when it went wrong, stamping on the floor like a baby, and just getting into these horrendous moods over what? Over something that's bringing you nothing apart from time wasting. Incredible. Destruction of positive self-concept. A destruction of positive self-concept. The voices consistently attempt to convince their victims that they are stupid, ugly, worthless, unlovable, a burden on others, and that everyone would be better off if they were not around. Now, this is interesting, Jerry, because in one case, this is exactly what the person said. They say, I'm a burden to you. It'd be better if I was dead. If I was dead, you could live your life.
And that's what I've heard that over and over and over again with patients tell me, the voices are telling me that nobody loves me. I'm a burden on everybody, to just go ahead and kill myself. I mean, it's common. It's one of their common things that they tell these people, because you start thinking about suicide. I mean, that's very upsetting. That's not an easy thing to do. And most people try it a bunch of times before they ever succeed. And it's a very nerve-wracking, negative emotional generating thought. So they love that. They love that. They can get the person thinking about killing themselves. It produces a lot of negative energy for them.
Yeah, the reason I was just laughing there, someone's just put in Mark, it's Common Law Malcolm. I do this character, Common Law Malcolm, and he's based on these idiots who are going around really getting themselves into huge trouble and thinking they know it all by quoting things like the Magna Carta, basically going around losing their houses and their cars on the back of this very flawed concept, which is almost comedic, which we've covered a great deal. But no, Common Law Malcolm is an observation. And I've always had this knack for doing voices, and I've liked comedy characters. Malcolm comes extremely easily to me because he's based on reality. He's not a voice that comes into my head. He's an idea that I had, which creates a voice that comes into my head. He's not negative. He's his own worst enemy, but he's an absolutely lovely bloke, and he's very, very funny, and he means well.
And you play you let this guy come through you.
Yeah, well, he basically makes appearances on the shows, and I've actually got Malcolm. I won't go into it tonight because we're doing something completely different, and it's going to go
Yeah.
completely off kilter if I bring him into
Okay.
the show. Okay, it's
Right.
really not worth going into that, Jerry. But
All
I
right.
can tell you about it later or some other time. But people, that's a very funny point actually, because it comes to me so naturally. I can just switch my voice from this one to him, and then have a
Yeah. Yeah.
conversation with myself. Do you know what I mean? Because I know what he's going to say,
Yeah.
only
Yeah.
because he's so bloody predictable. Yes. So basically, yeah, that was interesting what you're saying there. If they succeed in this, they will often move on to telling the victim to do everyone a favor and kill themselves. Schizophrenics have a suicide rate 3 to 5 times that of the general population. So we've dealt with that. That's a very disturbing aspect of this.
Well, what's
Yes.
interesting is that psychiatrists have the same suicide rate, 3 to 5 times that of the general population, and higher than any other doctor.
Yeah. Malcolm's voice is effing everywhere these days. Well, it is, because there's so many people like him around. And the thing is that we tried all this stuff 15 years ago. It didn't work then, and it's certainly not going to work now. But his catchphrase is "We are winning," of course, when he's not. Okay, attempts to pull their victim away from consensual reality. This is really interesting. The voices constantly attempt to pull their victim away from consensual reality and into their negative, hellish world of lies and deception. Now, this is so true, Jerry. I mean, obviously, you're vastly more experienced in this area, but this is exactly what I've seen. They take you into this hell world, and your life is fine. My life is fine. I'm so happy most of the time. Content with what I'm doing, and these people can drag you into this hell, this pit of hell, literally, can't they?
Yep, yep. They dragged themselves in there too. The voices
Exactly. They drag
dragged them
themselves
in
in
there.
first and drag you with them. Yes.
Yep, yep.
Mm.
And George would talk about that all the time, how they would attack his consensual reality and try to
Yes.
pull him away from what was going on in the environment around him into their private world of the voices. And he'd bring that up all the time, where they were attacking his consensual reality,
Yes.
which was a good observation for him. So he knew how to spot that.
Yeah, that's brilliant, because he was way ahead of the curve when we were talking about. So please look up that show we did with George. It's in the archive at winnersontheworld.net. If you put Jerry Marzinski in, it should come up. But George has also done other interviews with you, Jerry. So your YouTube channel is called Engineering Mental Sanity. Before we move on, yes?
Yeah. And the website is jerrymarzinski.com. Everything is there.
Yeah, we'll get back to that at the end of the show, and the book and where they can get that from. Yes, the voices constantly attempt to pull their victim away from consensual reality. That is such an important point. They will warp and distort the victim's perception, causing the victim to interpret situations in the most negative manner possible. And that is an amazing thing, actually, because that's where people who have this problem will completely misinterpret what you've said to them. And it's in response to something that could be funny. I remember one particular very violent episode happened when I was just watching a music video on MTV, and laughing at it because it was a bit kind of tongue in cheek. And all hell broke loose for no reason at all.
What,
You've frozen
somebody
up
in there
again.
thought you were laughing at them?
Yes, well, the response to what was happening in the room was the opposite of what this person thought it was, or what they brought to the table as it was happening. In other words, we were having a laugh and a joke, and then it came in as something. You always do this. You hate me. You always bring
There you go.
crazy
Yep,
stuff.
there
Yeah,
you go.
crazy stuff.
That's a prime example right there.
Yeah. I experienced that, and that is really disturbing because it's so out of place. So, in other words, their reality is being manipulated. They're no longer in the group reality of what's going on at all.
Right, right. Their
Yeah,
perception is totally warped by these things.
yeah. Use confusion as a means of instilling negative suggestions. It can clearly be seen that the voices take advantage of the confusion to instill negative suggestions. The victim begins doubting his own ability to interpret reality. The voices are more than willing to insert theirs. The victim doesn't like confusion and would rather latch onto the misguided information provided by the voices. But that can happen with people around the victim as well, because your reality is being completely distorted by their perception that's being put into them by these voices, right?
Hmm.
Do you want to say
Yeah, and
anything more on
it's
that?
the same technique that hypnotists use, where they'll instill a confusing state and then give the patient an out into a more clear picture of things, and
Yeah.
the confusion is unpleasant. So they'll move into whatever the hypnotist suggests.
Yes. Yeah. Use confusion as a means of instilling negative suggestions. Yes. The voices are more than willing to insert their negative suggestions. Exactly. Aversion to anything positive or beautiful. The voices have a distinct aversion to anything positive or beautiful and drive the victim away from joy or any positive endeavor by distraction. They do not want their victim to enjoy life. So that's really interesting, because I've seen that happen. In other words, you might all be enjoying yourself, and all of a sudden, the whole thing changes over nothing. A little like the last point we made, but you know, this takes it to a slightly different place, that the victim doubts their own ability to interpret the reality around them. Slightly different than the last point, in that they are tending to actually not interpret what's going on around them properly and react in a very different way, but they're also having their own perception warped as well.
That's
Yeah,
true.
yeah, yeah. Aversion to anything positive and beautiful. Yes. Any attempt to inform the schizophrenic patient that the voices are energetic parasites draining them will trigger a volatile tirade by the voices. And I've experienced that. Do you want to expand on that one?
Well, that's I figured that out late in my career. They
Yeah.
do not want the patient to know that they are energetic parasites. And what's so interesting about this is that they will consistently go off if you attempt to tell the patient this. And knowing this, what they tell the patient when they realize, I mean, as soon as they realize you're going to tell the patient that they are energetic parasites, they will do everything they can to block that. And what they'll say is, I mean, it's almost like clockwork. It's like they've all been programmed this way. And these are the voices in Georgia, halfway across the United States, all the way to here, and all these different psychiatric institutions in between. When they sense that you're about to tell the patient that they're parasites, they'll say, "Don't listen to him. He's crazy. He's stupid. He's a nut. Don't listen to anything he says." But by then the patient knows that, hey, I know more about these things than anybody else he's ever met, and they stay and they listen. So they then tell them to get up and get out of the room, to run, to bolt out of the ER, to leave the office, to get out. And if they don't do that, then they will tell them to attack. You know, and what I'll do is in the ER, I only had a very limited time to work with these people. So the ones that I felt would understand, that were far enough along to could understand without getting me in trouble, I would tell them that they were parasites. And before I did that, I'd tell them, okay, I'd ask them, "Are you hearing the voices now?" And they'd say, "No." And I said, "Okay, in about 3 minutes, you're going to, and they're going to be angry as hell. So brace yourself." So I said, what they're going to tell you is they're going to tell you to not listen to anything I have to say, to get out of my office. And if you don't do that, they're going to tell you to attack me. And sure enough, I go to tell them, hey, these things are energetic parasites. If you'll notice that every time they attack, your energy level goes down to nothing, and that's happened thousands of times to you. Where did your energy go? And then point out that they took it. And that would cause an explosion, and boom, 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 right down the line. That would happen. Get away from this guy. He's stupid. He's crazy. Don't listen to him. Get out of the office. Leave. Get out of the ER, or attack him. They would tell them that consistently, and I didn't even have to know that to know. And the patient would ask me, "Well, how'd you know that? I mean, do you hear voices?" And I said, "No, but I've experienced this enough times to know." And what was interesting about it is, if somebody told you, "Hey, Mark, you're gonna be dancing on your head in 5 minutes, and you're gonna fall down and break your butt," you're gonna go, "Screw you, I am not." But the voices couldn't do that, even though I predicted what they were going to do ahead of time. They did it anyway. It's like they couldn't stop it, which I thought was very strange. Anybody
Yeah.
else or anything else would, yeah, hey, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm not going to do any of this. But they ran on with it anyway. It's almost like a fixed action pattern or a computer program or something that they couldn't break that. And I found that very strange and very interesting.
Yeah, I was just reading some of the comments. Steve Watson said, "Just tell them to go away." Well, the point is that we're
Yeah,
talking about people who are under control. They don't know what's going on. They have to become aware of it, like George became aware of it. Now, I got through one night as this person was trying to kill themselves, and they eventually said, "This is not me." And we were using the "That's a Lie" program. Said anything that's coming into your head negative about me is being put there. It's not what you're thinking. That's not what I'm doing. And we went on like this and I explained it and it did work in the end. But unfortunately, it hasn't worked in the long term because this person is on a downward spiral and doesn't want to get out of it. So, yeah, just carry on, Jerry, with your point there.
yeah, that's about it. The other thing that's interesting about these things is that they hate kids. They hate
Mm.
children, and they will cause the parents to attack the children. Some of the nastiest battles I've ever seen were between a schizophrenic mother whose voices were telling them to attack and harm their kids, and they're fighting against that. And I don't know why they hate kids, but they hate kids. And then you look at this child trafficking stuff all around the world right now. It's the same thing. They're torturing
Yeah.
kids.
Yes. And somebody also put in, can anyone cure themselves of the voices? Can they do it on their own? Now, often they'll need an outside opinion because they don't know that the voices aren't them, right?
Right. It has been done. Sherry did it.
Mm. Yes.
Sherry did it, and they almost killed her. They had her on the fence, and they're telling her, "Yeah, just let go and just go crazy, and you'll be taken care of. They'll put you into a mental hospital. You won't have to work. You won't have to do anything. They'll feed you, da da da." And she fought back against that, but she understood what they were, and she understood
Yeah.
how to break up their patterns.
Hmm.
She's not a dummy, but for the average person, they need to be walked through this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's too shocking and it's too extreme. You can't just make these statements and expect them to work. We're not talking about positive thinking here, are we? We're
No,
not
no.
talking about, oh, I feel a bit depressed and there's voices in my head telling me I'm useless. And these are just when people get tired or depressed, these thoughts come in, but they're not the thoughts we're talking about. We're talking about something much more devious and much more active and much more
Darker.
structured than that, right? Yes. Yeah. Well, I think we've got through quite a lot there, Jerry. Do you want to
Yeah.
sum up now and talk a bit about the That's a Lie program? Because if anyone needs any help with this is a good place to start, right?
Yeah, sure he did a good job with that. I remember when I was working in the prison, I knew these things were liars. And I would ask the patient, time after time after time, I said, they're liars. Why do you listen to them? And their response was, because they're so damn convincing. You know, that that was the response. And that was the response from a bunch of them. Even though they knew they were liars, they were so convincing to them that they listened to them. And when Sherry came up with the That's a Lie program, I took it into the prison and I tested it, and it worked as long as they used it. It's like AA. Either use it or lose it. You have to use it consistently. They're like fishermen that they bait the hook and they throw it into your conscious thought stream, and they say, "Here, take this. Well, you bite on this, and if you bite on it, then they got you, and then they keep playing it. On the other hand, if you go, well, that's a bunch of crap. I know that's a hook. I know that they're trying to trap me, and you go, that's a lie. That's another lie you told me. You're just trying to get at me. They can't get their hook in the person if they realize that 95 or more percent of what these voices are telling them are lies. you know because you don't believe a lie. They only got you if they can get you to believe what they're saying. And like these patients said, they're very persuasive.
Oh, absolutely. And incredibly devious, and they know everything about the person, and they
Yep.
also know everything about the person who is being talked to and who's attacking somebody else. It's kind of,
Yeah.
they know about the other person as well,
So
or
they're
whoever's in
sucking
the
the energy.
vicinity. Yeah.
They upset the other person, and they suck the energy off of that person too. So it's
Yeah,
not just, that they're getting everybody that's involved with the schizophrenic that gets upset or gets driven crazy by the schizophrenic. They're sucking energy from the whole family.
absolutely.
It's not just the victim.
No, Kathy's put in the voices, demons are the offspring of fallen angels. That's a great kind of analogy, actually, because the biblical watchers were a scourge on the earth. And of course, the book of Enoch is all about him trying to get rid of them. But that does adequately describe what these things are. And the idea is that the fallen angels corrupted themselves and they left these evil spirits on the planet and they were buried in the earth. It's all fascinating stuff, but it's been going back a long way. That's the best way I think we can finish off tonight, is that this has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. So we're not talking about anything recent. We're not talking about anything that's put in people's heads by technology. We're talking about a phenomenon that is known and has been known in all religions throughout the world for time immemorial.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they never put the Book of Enoch into the Bible.
Yes.
So they corrupted that part, and then they corrupted the part where fear God, you're going to burn in hell. These are all additions by these things who were infected the people who were writing the Bible. God he isn't going to burn you. He isn't.
Oh, the God of the Old Testament. Yeah. Well, the
Yeah,
New
yeah, yeah,
Testament is
yeah.
entirely different. But
That stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
But the Nag Hammadi scriptures and the Apocrypha, in other words, things that weren't included in the Bible, refer to this and they call them the rulers or the archons, archon meaning magistrate or leader. And they molded Adam into a kind of human, which they could use. And that goes into intervention theory and all sorts of stuff. We haven't got time for that tonight, but it's very fascinating and right up my street. And that's the sort of stuff we like to look at on Windows on the World. Thanks, Jerry, for tonight. And do come back again soon. I hope people enjoyed that and they can watch it afterwards. It's there in the archive. Check out the archive at windowsontheworld.net. Join us on Spreaker every Sunday, 9:30 p.m. UK time. Please subscribe to us on Odyssey. And yes, it's all at the homepage at windowsontheworld.net. I'll probably see you later in the week. And we've got lots of stuff to cover with what's going on with the new UN initiatives. Everything is speeding up. I get information sent to me every day. Can't keep up with it. Very tiring times we're living in, but stay positive and don't let those negative thoughts get into your head. Thanks, Jerry. Do you want to give us your website and how to get your book?
Well, it's Jerry Marzinsky, MarZinsky.com. You can order the book from the website. That's a Live program is under articles there. And all the videotapes are under videos. So there's a lot of information that we put in there, including testimonials of people who have recovered with this information and have used it themselves. And some of them that weren't too bad off did fully recover on their own.
Thanks, Jerry. That was great. And thanks everyone who's been listening. It's quite late there in the UK. It's even later where I am. I don't know what time it is where you are, Jerry. What time is it in Arizona?
It's 3:16 p.m.
Oh, it's just the afternoon for you. You've got
Just
the rest of the day. So you can go out now and water the cactuses.
Yep.
All right, then. See you all soon, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Okay.